We support clients very closely throughout the whole of their project life, and that's not only around environmental approvals at the start of the project, but also issues as they arise during the operation and production phase of a project. Those issues relate to responding to incidents as they occur. For example, the Queensland floods of a couple of years ago had a very heavy impact upon the Queensland coalfields, and a number of environmental authorisations were required to get those sites back into operating mode as quickly as possible.
Well, over the last few years, it's certainly the case that with commodity trading, the trend has been towards an index pricing, so there's been a whole revamp of that market. And I think that has caused other commodities to look at how they're pricing offtake contracts and to build in flexibility for the future. So what we're seeing is people saying, okay, we're used to this benchmark, but let's actually think about what happens if that benchmark isn't there in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, because quite often these contracts run for that length of time. So mechanisms are being put in place to deal with that. The problem with that is that that also leaves you with flexibility, which can mean uncertainty in some cases. So it's really a question of getting the balance right and making sure that the contract does what it should.
The key consideration, I think, for clients in the operation phase is having a good handle on your contractual administration, having the right team delivering the project, as opposed to just waiting to see what the contractors do. From our perspective, is as important as how you've got your risk allocations set up in the first place and your procurement methods in the first place.
In the operations phase, we're seeing some really interesting innovations quite rapidly developing. For instance, in the development of autonomous driverless trucks to be used at the frontline operations phase.
During operations and the development of the project, one of the key considerations for the owner will be safety management. There'll have been a process of developing various safety management plans, and a lot of the obligations will go on to the constructor and then ultimately the mining contractor during development. But the owner will want to take an active interest in relation to that, particularly because obligations will fall on the owner, the mine manager, and one of the key issues is making sure that the incident response process is there and everyone understands the role that they have, so that when an incident happens, in the heat of the moment, everyone can play their part.
Hopefully at this phase you've got the project throwing off free cash and you're looking to distribute that free cash. And a big focus of us in the tax space is to ensure that that free cash or surplus funds can be distributed in an efficient manner. There's a bit of a focus on that at the moment because companies are trying to balance between distributions and reinvestments. That's causing some build-up in franking accounts at present. Another key focus in this phase of the project is the marketing arrangements of the product. The Australian government is very much fixed on this notion of base erosion and profit shifting. It's a big area of focus. So we're finding that clients are spending a lot of time making sure that their marketing arrangements are appropriate, having regard to our transfer pricing rules.
In the operation and production phase, the key issue is that I generally get involved with is where there is disputation around the way in which the parties wish to develop their mine. Joint venture disputes are common, but they can be avoided if at an early stage the parties invoke workable dispute mechanisms.
By the time a project hits the operation and production phase, it really should have in place robust policies and procedures that address anti-bribery risk, that address sanctions compliance, and also address issues of various impacts on stakeholders like community members, and human rights impact assessment is really coming into play there. Also, it's really important that projects have in place strong grievance procedures at the project or company level that address emerging complaint issues so that they don't escalate, or so that escalation is minimised in terms of issues faced by project affected persons.
In the operations phase, one of the main issues is if a client wishes to expand production during that phase, getting access to rail and port infrastructure can be quite difficult. There are a number of regulatory regimes which govern access to this infrastructure, but a number of difficult issues arise, and sometimes getting access can take some years.
A key consideration in the mining sector, particularly if you're mining bulk commodities, is logistics. I've heard it said that Mining is more about logistics, so moving product from the mine to the port and shipping it to a customer, than it is actually about the mining aspect. So the thing we've helped clients with a lot is coming up with the infrastructure solution that best works for their business. So the one I've had most exposure to is West Australia and the West Australian iron ore industry, where we've worked with clients in relation to the integrated rail port systems in the Pilbara for the iron ore industry. I think at the moment we're in a stage of the cycle where the trend is towards more regulatory intervention rather than less, but as I said, it's very much a cycle and the wheel will turn again.
A key consideration at the operations stage in terms of access to supply chain infrastructure is ensuring that the access rights granted are truly secure and, if you like, not compressible or subject to being chipped away at, and in return a real focus on the performance of both the infrastructure provider and all participants in the supply chain. So on the one hand, a very significant financial commitment through take-or-pay contracts by the producer. On the other hand, looking in return for that for real security of access and guarantees that the performance of the system will live up to expectations.